podcast. My name is Steven.
I'm Daniel.
I'm Sam.
And tonight we are so thrilled to have Mr. J.B. Jackson back with us again, author of Ursula of Ulm. We spoke with JB a couple months ago about his first book, Shagduk, and we're back to talk about his new book, which is a direct sequel and book 2 in the Re Doridica series. JB, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you
Super
for
stoked to
having
talk
me.
to you about this.
I love your show, and I've been looking forward to this. You guys are fun.
Thanks,
Yeah.
man. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, last time we had the Harvey Wallbangers. Tonight
yeah.
we have some port and Guinness.
So yeah, we're drinking a purple velvet in honor of Professor Harrington.
Yeah. So
I
cheers.
appreciate it. I feel like
Cheers
I'm
to you.
letting people down by not having some similar Shagduk beverage
That's great.
in
It's all
hand.
right. We've got you covered. We've got plenty here, so you're with us in spirit. But
Good.
cheers to you and to Ursula.
It's not bad.
I've never had one before.
Yeah, this is great. We're trying Harvey Wallbangers and all kinds of new
It's
things.
nice.
And I felt like it wasn't a direct tie-in, but I got of course from Portugal, but I got a Cockburn's Porto port, which feels
Nice.
It feels connected.
There's some synergy, maybe.
Yeah.
With the way
The way
The way-
Ursula starts, at least.
the way Steven's love life goes.
Yeah.
So before we get into things, to our listeners, definite spoiler warning for Shagduk.
Yep.
We're gonna try, at least here at the beginning, to be as spoiler free as possible for Ursula of Ulm, but spoiler alert. You know,
Yes.
we're gonna be talking about the book, so just proceed with caution. Go buy the book, read it, and listen again. So the beginning of this one, JB, has me really wanting you to write. I want more Der Schleim. I have to be honest. Like, I so thoroughly enjoyed reading a section that was like, you know, such a part of this story in this world, but from such a completely different and divorced time period.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would love a JB Jackson medieval, low fantasy.
Or like
work
just
would
a
be
JB Jackson of Dracula.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it
it
was
totally
killer. It
felt
was
like
so cool.
Dracula, like just jumping right into it. I was like,
Well, the way it came about is Pylon Press periodically puts out a anthology of its writers, and there was an upcoming one loosely based on, well, think of it as an inspiration piece of what was it called? Diary of a Hangman's Diary. This guy Franz Schmidt, who lived in the 17th century in Nuremberg, he was the town's hangman, and he recorded the details of every hanging.
Oh wow.
whoa.
Wow.
And so it was an inspiration piece, kind of like a pillow or a painting could be. And the editor of the anthology said, hey, keep this in mind, but do your own thing. And so there's like kind of a loose theme to the collection. And I wanted to participate in it, but I was too busy working on Shagduk and Ursula of Ulm. And then I thought, well, if I could only produce something that ties into these books, I kind of foresaw that it could be, like an introduction or included in the book somehow, maybe at the end, but it would help with my world building.
Yeah.
I have this whole big vision for how these books fit into this world and everything. So I used that as an opportunity to produce something for myself, but was also able to contribute to the anthology by doing
That's
so.
awesome. I love that. That's one of my favorite books that we've talked about many times with the Chronicles of the Black Company. One of my favorite sections in that, the Raker scene, Glenn Cook wrote as a separate thing and that ended up in the book. So I love it. I love it when that happens. That's very cool. And you perfectly placed it too there at the beginning, where it's like this great flavor piece for what was upcoming in the book and further learning about Ursula, and yet it being a separate piece. That was awesome.
I really felt it when we talked last time. You talked about how you wanted to write something kind of dark and brooding and ominous, and that was like what you were going, and how your humor entered the book more than you expected, just naturally. I really felt in that Der Schleim, or however you're supposed to say that. I felt, it was like, okay, this is the darkness. This is really the darkness he was talking about. But you nailed it.
I guess
really,
so.
yeah.
I guess it's not very funny, is it?
No, not that part. No.
There are some moments that are pretty funny though.
Yeah. Well, Ursula has a lot of humor. I didn't remember a funny bit in the very beginning.
Well, he like saw her naked and was like jerking off, right?
That was okay. That was kind of
funny.
That was pretty funny.
Very
Actually.
twisted way.
Yeah, dark, very darkly humorous.
Dark comedy.
Dark humor, which we appreciate.
Yeah,
very much.
Yeah, that was fun.
Maybe I just found it gross. I don't know about. I don't know what's up with you, man. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah. Maybe that says more about me. But I had a laugh. I had a laugh.
JB, we talked a lot at the beginning of our last discussion about your influences for Shagduk. Were there any other were there any works specifically that were of an influence specifically for Ursula for book 2 here?
Well, I anticipated that you might ask this question, and I thought about it. Certain things, when people say something inspires them, like you often hear, like there'd be some cool band and they say, yeah, we were inspired by Velvet Underground, and you're like, well, really, I don't hear that in your music. You know, how were you inspired? And they never make that connection explicit. When I think of something that inspires me, here's an example of something that inspires me. I'm reading all of Ian Fleming's Bond novels right now.
Oh, heck yeah.
And I keep these little notebooks next to me, and I find myself stopping almost on every page and jotting something down that captures my imagination, or, a word that was used in a particular way. That doesn't happen very often, but it doesn't have to be obviously related to what I'm working on. And I brought up here, by the way, I'm coming to you from what we call the Hobbit room.
I was wondering where you were.
It's I'm just trying to escape. I don't want to bother the family and the dogs and the cats, and so I thought I'd come up here. So surrounded by
heck yeah,
it's like the Hobbit hole in the library.
Records, got a wall of amps behind me.
I love it.
Perfect.
It's a great image. I was going to ask, because I was like, this doesn't look quite like where you were last time. So
I brought up here just random books that inspired me. So I'll run through them pretty quickly. So we've got Woodhouse here. He's a humorist, wrote probably 100 years ago. This is where the Butler Jeeves comes from.
Oh, nice.
Oh, yeah.
And it's kind of similar in tone to the Diary of a Nobody that I mentioned at your last show. The Purple Cloud is MP Shiel is an example of a Last Man on Earth story.
Nice.
The idea of that really captures my imagination, and I find myself thinking to myself sometimes, gee, if I was the last person on Earth, what would I do for dinner tonight? But what would I do for dinner a month from now? Where would I sleep if I could choose any place? There's no electricity. What do I do about that? And I just let my mind, go wherever it goes. So this book was, somebody's attempt to do that, and I thought it was pretty cool.
Nice.
See, we have Against the Grain by Joris Karl Wiesmann. I found a photograph of his tombstone in Paris that I must have taken there in '98. Here's an example. I collect vintage bookmarks that I find in used books. So this was a really cool one. Don't know where I got that. But yeah, this book inspired. Well, I think it inspired Oscar Wilde. I think it was his favorite book, and it's about kind of an eccentric armchair traveler who descends into decadence to escape the horrors of the real world.
Oh, wow.
I like this
That
book a
definitely
lot.
sounds like a book that Oscar Wilde would have enjoyed.
We've got a Kootenai grammar written by probably a missionary. The curious thing about it is it's written in Latin, except the parts that are written in Kootenai, of course. So my Latin's terrible, and my Kootenai is even worse. So reading through this kind of was bewildering, and it kind of gave me an idea of what it might be to encounter a grammar of Dordic that
Yeah.
has.
I'm not familiar with Kootenai as a language.
It's a Native American language.
Oh,
spoken
okay.
Probably in Alaska, I think.
Okay, cool.
So here we have W. Scott Elliott's The Story of Atlantis and Lost Lemuria. This is an example of a pseudoscientific book that treats crazy subject matter as if it were real. I mean, this guy believes that there was an Atlantis in Lemuria, and it kind of helps put me in this frame of mind where I can consider that the places that I'm thinking about could be real too. I really appreciate it's got, trying to find them. Where are they? A map of this whole, it's like the map of the world, but superimposed on it is the map of another world. And it's like, how does that work? And it's just, that was inspirational for sure.
No kidding.
I've got a book of legendary spells by L.B.
So
Wright. It's pretty folky. It's probably straight out of folklore, but
that's awesome. We'll return to that. I have some magic questions coming up, but
then more serious magic is ancient Egyptian magical texts.
Oh wow!
I consulted this heavily when I was dealing with some of the magic material. I guess this is a spoiler, but not a very big one. I've been really reading this book a lot. Getaway. Driving Techniques for Escape and Evasion by Ronald George Erickson II.
That's so awesome.
It's really cool.
Practical and, outside of magic, just James Bondy, right? Like that's where it's all.
Yep, I got 4 more to go, and then we can move on.
Please feed us. We love this stuff so much.
This an Appendix N writer that I was talking to Ernie Gygax, and we were talking about Appendix N books, and he mentioned Margaret St. Clair, and I thought, oh, of course you would. That's the one author from the list that I never read before, and he was a big fan of hers and recommended this book to me, particularly because The Dancers of Noyo, particularly because it's set in the neck of the woods that I live in, Sonoma County.
Nice.
And I found the places that St. Clair writes about in this book really brought she talked about roads that I've been on and towns I've been in, and so now I look at those places differently through this lens, and it really I appreciate that a lot, and I hope that people who are familiar with the places that I write about are affected similarly.
Yeah.
Let's see. This is kind of a spoiler, I guess. A Handbook to the Palace of Minos. It's another one of those books that, archaeological stuff. It's got all these cool as shit maps that, I would have used for D&D back in the day. There's the palace map.
Oh, hell yeah.
That's awesome.
And I see something like this and I think, I want to write something that utilizes these maps somehow, or, make up my own maps based on that. So I've been looking at the Dictionary of the Old West for special words that I can use to pepper some of the scenes that I write that take place in the Western United States. And then lastly, this book is really cool. It's called The Book of 1,000 Tongues. And it's put out by the United Bible Societies. And so it's got 1,000 examples of the Lord's Prayer written in languages you've never even heard of.
Wow.
For example, Isoko and Isneg and Isubu. A lot of them have their own scripts.
Wow.
And so I don't have to tell you why a book like this would,
Yeah.
push me over the edge. So, yeah, back to your question. What inspires me? Things like this inspire me.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it just comes out of nowhere. For example, this morning I was riding my bike through the neighborhoods, and I just discovered, by the way, how to activate the voice feature on my phone. I can talk into my phone and it transcribes it.
Yeah.
So I found myself stopping every block practically to whip out my phone, to pause the music, to pull up this notepad app, and then I push the little microphone thing and then wait for the beep. And I'm sitting there saying all this crazy stuff into my phone. And then I screenshot it to save it. And I'm sure there's probably a better way to do that.
I respect the system.
So yeah, I go back and periodically I've got all these screenshots of shit like that, and I've got all my notebooks and pads of paper and halves of junk mail envelopes that I use those in the car, and I transcribe them into a document that's categorized. So I've got a section for characters and scenery and atmosphere. So when I need something like that, I can refer to my notebooks and draw from that. And by that time, I forget where the inspiration comes from, even.
Yeah.
And sometimes I look at what I've written. And it's like, this isn't inspiring at all. Why did I write this? What does it even mean?
Right.
Songs can inspire me, it's particularly ones that are from the era that the book takes place. And anything can inspire me. It's like I think what does Stephen listen to? Here's Steve Miller's like an album. No relation, by the way. When the way I made the name Stephen Miller is I may have talked about this on your last show, was when I was a kid in '77, Stephen was the coolest name you could have. So why not?
I think that Stephen is the coolest name that you can have.
Yeah. And then Miller is just a family name. And then I'm like, well, Stephen Miller, it's already been taken. And I thought, well, no, because that's not how the world works. You've got people with the same name.
Yeah.
As an aside, my parents named my brother Michael in 1983 when Michael Jackson was at his peak.
There you go. Yeah.
So you had a Michael Jackson in the family.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this morning I was inspired by the song Philadelphia Freedom by Elton John. There were some lyrics in it, and it's like, oh yeah, 1976, Philadelphia. Stephen was in Philadelphia with Diane. I had a scene I'd already written where she's singing along with the song. And I thought, well, I'll make her sing this song, and then I can do this and this and this. I whip out my phone, and I'm, talking into it under a tree. And so that's how that works.
That's awesome. This is
really
just
cool.
This is just purely a song related thing in the book, but I had to call it out because I had a very similar revelation to Stephen in the book. But you call out ELO's Evil Woman, and Stephen says that he always thought it was Medieval Woman.
Yeah.
And I remember that ELO is one of the bands that I remember listening to when I was a little kid in my dad's truck when I would drive around to little odd jobs with him, and I always thought it was Medieval Woman. And it was until fairly recently that I realized that they just were saying Evil Woman, and not Medieval Woman. And I still have a hard time. I still have a hard time hearing it. So I love that. I love that you included that in the book, because that spoke very directly to this Stephen as well.
Well, Medieval Woman's a lot cooler.
I agree.
It's way cooler.
I want to think that's what it's called.
It's more inspiring.
Yeah.
It's a lot more to it.
Yeah, it's more evocative too.
And more poetic. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Evil is so mundane.
I mean, it's just whatever.
Like, she could be anything, but she's only medieval.
Yeah. Well, ELO, if you guys are listening to this, you should just go ahead and change it and retroactively make it Medieval Woman. We've all agreed. The four of us agree. Medieval Woman is better. I love those magic books that you pulled up. And that was something that I wanted to discuss as well, because there certainly is. There's a lot more that the magic escalates in Ursula from Shagduk.
Mm-hmm.
And something we've talked about a fair amount recently is this whole idea in fantasy literature nowadays of magic systems and
Yep.
this kind of obsession, for good and for bad, depending on who's writing it, of like very kind of tight rule set, almost making magic scientific in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, especially seeing these books now that you've pulled up, have you started? Did you put many kind of rules in place for yourself, or have you started developing your own kind of sense of what the rules of magic in this universe are, or
Well,
is it
that's
a
a
little
really
more
interesting
open?
question, because I understand that fantasy writers increasingly, there's pressure to come up with a magic system that that is unique.
Mm-hmm.
My magic system's different. It's
Right.
based on the color blue, and this happens. That can be great, but I don't have the time or
Sure.
to come up with some reinvent the wheel of magic. Similarly, unlike Tolkien, I don't have time to invent a language.
Right.
I've tried. I've got a lot of notes towards something like that. You start it and you think, oh boy, this is a lot more work than I thought. So I just figured, well, all the different magic systems in the world, all the way back through history, back to the ancient Egyptian magical texts, and they all have certain things in common. And if you look at the occult, Crowley, and all that, it all feels like it's just variants of the same thing. And I just thought, why not just make the magic in my books, just make it the same as this stuff, but give it a little bit of local flavor to reflect where it came from, and then I don't have to do all that work, and it'll ring true. I don't run the risk of inventing something that somebody doesn't buy.
Yeah.
They don't get it, or I mess it up somehow, and people, well, he's violating his own rules here.
Right.
And also, it means that I don't have to explain it too much, which is not something Stephen would do in his own diary. And I made that explicit when Randy and Stephen talk about having a red notebook that you put all of your magical notes and thoughts in, and you don't put that shit in your diary, and you don't talk about it in public. Then it kind of ties into the idea that magic and the occult is something secret, and not something mundane that you talk about by the water cooler.
Right.
So will there one day be a 5th or a 6th installment that is the red notebook?
I thought about that. I was actually thinking about that today. As I said a minute ago, I didn't want to reinvent something.
Right.
So I would not put energy into creating an entire red notebook. Sure. I don't know if that would be something that you could read and enjoy for too long, but I was thinking about writing up a page from it. Putting that as an appendix in one of the books.
I like that.
That would be awesome.
And I probably will attempt it. We'll see if it's any good.
Well, because I guess if it is a technical journal, it would be a little more dry. It's not like there's not gonna be. It would be that. That makes a lot of sense.
But seeing segments of it would be very cool. We talked about the various red books in our last conversation. We've discovered another one since. We just read the Mabinogion, the ancient Welsh mythology tales, and half of that is from the Red Book of Hergest.
Yes.
So
Yep.
there's another big important red book to add to the list.
And so because you've heard of red books before, I've heard of a couple of red books. By having a red book in my book means it kind of ties into the world as we know it. It makes it more believable. Tolkien did a lot of that when he reinvented, well, not reinvented, but kind of invented his own mythology for England. It was just a reflection of the mythologies that surrounded England. And it echoed all of them the way that mythologies do, because they all ultimately could come from the same source, the way languages do. And so I try to use that when I can. It's it's low hanging fruit. You get a lot of bang for the buck.
Well, it's a great way to kind of maximize your world building by using elements that exist in our world, whether you believe the magic is real or not. Like, this is stuff that's been practiced by humans for a very long time. And I hesitate to call it a system of magic, but I thoroughly enjoyed it as somebody who likes not having as many rules and strictures on magic, because it makes it feel more like magic to me.
Yeah.
Of course I like seeing, especially here in Ursula, seeing kind of a little bit of repetition of things. Like, we're kind of getting to see a glimpse of Stephen's kind of his arsenal, like what he's familiar and comfortable with using. So there is like kind of a foundation that we're starting to get a glimpse of, but the flavor of it is very much like this. Again, real world is kind of, but something that exists, and maybe you have if you have any familiarity with the occult or with magic or anything like there's a flavor here that is immediately recognizable that I enjoyed very much, and I'm enjoying the escalation of it in the series.
Well, speaking of magic systems again, I guess you could say it was an inspiration of mine. Was Fritz Leiber's Conjure Wife, which takes place at a university academic setting. This professor comes home and opens a drawer and discovers evidence that his wife is a witch. That really stirred my imagination. But the way the magic works in that book is he doesn't really dwell on the details of it. And so it kind of evokes more of a mood and a feeling. I didn't not for 1 second did I stop and think, oh, is this realistic? Or, what is this system of magic? He distracted me.
Out of all the systems I've ever read about, this one probably feels the most real out of all the magic systems I've read in fantasy stuff. And I feel very trusted as an audience person of the book reading it, knowing that there is some sort of system, because they're obviously practicing it. And I think that for the longest time, I didn't figure out what farming a muskrat meant for the longest time. And then I was like, oh shit, that means they're doing that he's doing that. And the most I think we got in this book is when Stephen actually lists out
you get a list of
that he
spells.
has. And then a couple of them seem like just insults almost. They might not even be spells, but they have a magic to them as well. I loved that it feels very practical, but magical at the same time. So in essence, I feel like the system is there, but the fact that we don't know about it makes it more established, if that makes sense. So
Sure.
for me, it feels like the most solid magic system I've read about, but I know nothing about. But that also is kind of what magic is too. So
my instinct has paid off then.
For me, it's great. It's very compelling. Good. You definitely want to read the next page, because you're maybe I'll figure something out, but I probably won't, because who knows? It's magic.
Yeah, and we're not magic users.
And while we're talking about the magic, I thought it was really interesting in this book because Stephen has some magical breakthroughs at the end of Shagduk, and you kind of see the fruit or the consequences and the reality of that, like in his life, it felt very much like a stand-in for like the powerlessness of being a young man as you try to make your space in this world. Because obviously, a part of it is obviously that he's doing a lot of love spells or charming spells, which mostly gets him into trouble.
Almost all of his magic. I mean, he opens a freaking portal and then just leaves it open.
Yeah, exactly. But I thought that I thought that there was, it felt like commentary on the emotional state of the powerlessness of finding your own way, and like the way you would both use and abuse like magic if that was real for someone as they're trying to figure out who they are and express themselves and either find love or like and in this case definitely not love, but trying to find, you know, sexual fulfillment, but forcing that then into this place that's like not rewarding and bad, and then also trying to blow up a disco, I guess. So, you know, so it's all sorts of fun things.
Yeah, but that disco needs to go.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, the thing is, you know, you take a guy like Steven, and you know, again, Steven is not me, but you know, if you've written it all, you know that you put yourself and people you know into your characters, and so he's kind of I pretend he's a proxy of me, and I try and think, you know, what would I do? That informs what a lot of the things that Steven does. So if you give a guy like that a spell book that he can read and understand, you know, what would you do with that information?
Yeah.
For example, tomorrow morning you might have to go to work, right? You brush your teeth, you eat your breakfast, you drive to your job, you sit down in your cubicle or whatever. What are you going to use that magic for tomorrow? What problems do you have in your life that you want to solve? That's really interesting to me.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, the practical application. It's awesome.
And then learning the consequences as the story goes on of trying to solve your problems with magic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and is that a good thing?
No, yeah. Well, because there were some elements of this that felt and I wanted a better metaphor when I was thinking about this, but it felt Breaking Bad adjacent as there, and it was, which is a character finding agency in a way that's maybe not approved by society, you know, which is
good for it,
or good for them
if it's Breaking Bad.
But because of that, finds a level of fulfillment and satisfaction that's maybe a new thing for them, which is it's Walter White adjacent in some capacity. I wish I had a better one than better reference than that, but there was yeah, and it was interesting. You know, I'm hopeful for Steven to not maybe fall as hard, and I think they're very different characters. It doesn't feel like Steven is going to become maybe quite the, I mean, I guess we don't know, but like, it doesn't feel like to me he's going to become quite the monster that Walter White ended up becoming. But there was definitely, it felt like we were on a seesaw moment where it could go one way or the other for him, depending on how things shake out.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a lot of ideas. Can we talk about moments in the book? Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Because there are some, I mean, you got me with Tim. I kind of felt for him when he starts like talking about like, back in Nam kind of stuff like that. You know, I mean, I feel like that was kind of expected, but also just got me. You know, it was the most like kind of like great character thing that you can expect, but it really just kind of it slid in there in such a perfect way that I was like, oh, okay, this is really well received. But it would be like you would talk, it's almost like a character trope, but it was like so done, it was done so well. Like after having all of this hatred for Tim for like almost all of the book, and then finding that little bit out, I was like, okay, he can kind of be an asshole. Like, you know, he's seen some shit. Like, I really, really respected that moment. Did anybody else feel that way about Tim?
Yeah, no, I very much appreciated finally like seeing the humanity in Tim.
Yeah.
And
well, two things about Tim and actually about Steven too is I didn't want to go there with Vietnam too much, even though it was an era where that was still, it loomed large in our
Absolutely.
zeitgeist. And my editor said, "You've got to do more Nom stuff in here. It's conspicuous to me that you're avoiding this." And so I credit him with forcing me to try and find a way to do that.
Yeah, you did it great. You did the thing
Usefully.
Like, yeah.
Well,
in a way that wasn't gratuitous.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't. It feels very much like it feels like what somebody who was there and didn't really want to talk about it would have written in their diary about finding out, oh, he was there too, and he went through this.
Yeah,
like making a note of it for himself, from Stephen making a note of it for himself, that because that's an important, impactful moment for him of finding that out about Tim.
Yeah, and we get a lot more of Tim and Stephen. This book is almost like they're like teaming up now that like Randy's kind of gone. It's almost like that's who he's hanging out with the most in terms of dudes.
And you find out, and this makes total sense, but he's basically in love with Bonnie, but because of attachment issues or something, or what he's been through, he's also like a womanizer. So he's just clinging onto these relationships that don't mean anything to him, while he'd really prefer to actually have something more romantic with Bonnie, and then kind of in that conflict. And it's really quite sad. I think everybody's known somebody like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, this person also is these people could be us too.
Sure. Yeah.
Tim's a little bit of an asshole. Stephen can be kind of an asshole. I've heard people say that they don't like Stephen.
Sure.
But I don't know if that's important to like him or not. But you got to remember, this is someone's diary, and what people put in their diaries is not for the eyes of other people. You confess terrible thoughts and things you did that you wouldn't tell anyone else.
Otherwise. No, it's true.
Yeah.
So Sam was mentioning that. I one thing, as I was thinking, especially about Shagduk in this, Shagduk felt very slice of life, and then obviously the weirdness and different things ramp up as the book continues. But there's a lot of chapters where like close to nothing is happening, which I found really delightful.
Yeah.
Obviously, where we end with some really climactic things happening, it makes sense for Ursula to it's true to Stephen's life. There are a lot of those details, but also, while the first book covers just over 4 months, this one is just basically 1 month. So there's, and the diary entries are a lot longer. There's a lot more happening, but this book is also several pretty major set pieces. It feels like
where there's a library.
Yeah,
we get to see like lots of different.
We've got a tour. Then you've got the retreat. You've got the night at the disco.
The retreat.
You've got the big retreat. You've got the big. There's a one. I guess maybe I'm fully blasting into spoiler territory, but whoops. But
now's the time to stop watching.
And then there's the visit to Dawn's house, a series of dates, and then at the end the end is the end. And I might be missing a major event there, but where there are some down moments, but. When I was thinking about it, it was interesting where obviously you had these events planned, but I was wondering how natural was the difference in the timeline? Because I just assumed that the timing of the books would be similar, that which there was no reason to assume that, but I just thought it would be another 3 or 4 months. And then this one was like way more focused in on that like May and June. I was curious, what was there a plan to have longer sections, or was it just the events are taking longer to tell about, so that's what happened, and just then the episodic nature of it. I'm just curious your thinking there.
Well, all I planned was when the book starts, it's this normal guy who has a normal life. Nothing interesting happens, kind of like Bilbo at the beginning of The Hobbit. Just a hobbit. Here I am smoking my pipe.
Yeah.
And then the ball starts rolling and it starts gathering that moss, and it gets bigger and bigger. So I wanted to ramp up the stakes. I wanted to ramp up the excitement, the danger. And by doing so, it just as a side effect, it made the entries longer, I guess.
Sure.
I didn't plan that at all, and I was surprised myself when I finished it and thought, it's only a month long, huh?
Yeah.
No. That makes sense though with I mean all the things unfolding. Like you can't have a portal open for like 3 months in the office.
Right.
Nothing out, and he's got a shit ton to journal about now, you know. So
well, and it made sense at the beginning too, where the entries were longer because he was on tour. Where it's like whenever I'm traveling, there's like
he
there's
was
just way
writing-
more happening in
yeah.
your life.
Well,
is-
yeah, I was gonna say,
you're in a
like,
book
yeah,
forever.
we can attest to the last couple weeks. Like,
Oh my
sometimes
gosh.
life happens, and it's like 2 weeks or a month goes past, and it's like an unbelievable amount of
Yeah.
life things end up happening.
Mhm.
where and then there can be other 2 weeks where it's like,
Just
yeah,
normal.
you work and
Yeah.
you eat food, but then nothing really happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So funny that that happened naturally as you're writing it. That
Yeah.
you know, I guess is kind of human, right? Makes
Mhm.
sense.
How much of this book, how much of Ursula did you have in mind when you were writing Shagduk? Did you kind of know where this story was going to go, and maybe even into entries in the future, or was it kind of one story at a time?
There were stories I wanted to tell, and I didn't know how to tell them. And the first attempt at that was, I mentioned this on your last show, when I did those zines in the 90s.
Mhm.
One of them was a very Woodhouseian Diary of a Nobody style diary of a person who lived in modern day San Francisco, who was kind of fancied himself as an eccentric dandy snob who would walk outside and just be horrified by modern life and write about it in a humorous way. And the joke would be on him. So when I finally figured out years later, okay, this is what I want to do, I went back to those zines and those diary entries, and it's amazing to me how I just lifted them out of the zine and plopped them into the book and
Nice.
changed a few names, and it worked pretty well. You know, obviously Stephen is not the same character that wrote the diary that was in the zines.
Mhm.
So he doesn't come off as a snob, I don't think. I don't think he comes off as horrified at the modern world. But it was just the mundane things that were happening.
Sure.
So I did have an idea of what I wanted to do, and I figured it would take many volumes. And so at first I didn't know how long this was going to be. But then as I wrote the initial manuscript, which was about 250,000 words when I presented it to my publisher, and they said, similar to Alan and Unwin, to Tolkien, they said, Lord of the Rings, this is too long. We're going to break this up into smaller chunks. So we're not publishing like a phone book sized book.
Yeah.
Right.
Because we've seen what those Lord of the Rings omnibus editions look like. You can't even. So we worked together to find a place where we could end Shagduk, and then I had to kind of cauterize it to make it feel like an ending. And then likewise, when I started Ursula, it just was the next day, and I had to kind of refashion that to make it feel like the beginning of a second book. So by the time I finished Ursula, I still had another 70,000 words that I'd already written toward book 3. But because of the way Shagduk and Ursula changed, those remaining 70,000 words have a lot of issues. Like they don't connect to what preceded it. So I've been kind of fixing it and going through it and thinking about it, and I've got all these new ideas. So I'm kind of thinking now that I'm going to rewrite book 3. You know, I'll take what I've written as a guideline and try and just move it over. But if I just keep working with the existing manuscript, I feel like I'm getting in over my head. It's getting too chaotic, too hard to control.
Yeah.
And I mean, the ideas I came up with this morning on my bicycle are pretty exciting to me. and it means that I'd have to rewrite a lot of stuff in book 3. So I think I'm probably just going to start over pretty soon.
Dang.
Well, hey, I mean, that's you just said it's just a second draft. It's not even just starting over. It's just second draft.
Yeah, I don't
That's
work.
what I tell myself when I start crying about restarting something.
I don't know what number draft to call these things anymore. Is it a first draft? It's a second. They're just too organic.
Yeah, sure.
So I know what's going to happen in book 3. I mean, the ending's already written. I know what needs to happen, but the events surrounding that and leading up to it are not written in stone yet. So I know what book 4 is going to be, and I'm super excited about that. And it's where books like A Handbook to the Palace of Minos, that inspiration is going to get to come into play.
There's the spoiler, yeah.
And then I thought, well, that could be the end of it, but I've since come up with, okay, there could be a book 5, and I know how that would play out, and so I have an idea for that. So I think it's going to end at book 5.
Okay,
nice.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning that before.
Yeah, five's a good number.
That's great.
A pentology.
Yeah,
I like the Pentateuch.
So I had a question for you guys here about the end of going from the end of Shagduk into Ursula, because I don't know if sometimes I'm capable of like really delving in on my first read of something and like figuring things out and like trying to do that. Other times I can just like turn the detective off and just like exist as I'm reading it. Spoiler alert for Shagduk. Did you guys see Gudu being Shagduk?
Absolutely.
No.
Absolutely.
Okay.
When I found out it was him, I was like, that makes so much freaking sense. Because Gudu was always so weird and knew nothing about
I knew there was something going on.
The way he's talked about, like, there's something.
But I had started to think he was going to be a wizard.
Right. Well, yeah, that's what
something.
at the end of the book I thought that was what it was.
Because he's there and he's like doing stuff, and you're like, okay.
Okay, so I'm glad that we're all on the same.
No, I didn't get it.
Bringing it back to you, JB. So was it always your intention writing Shagduk that Gudu is Shagduk, or did that come about later?
Yes, I know exactly who Shagduk is, and since you've only read the first 2 books, you really don't know who he is yet. Awesome. And I'm kind of chuckling to myself. Please do.
Okay, that's great. No,
that's
great.
We
definitely don't want any for future spoilers, but that's fun to know. His story's not over either. But I just loved that. It was such a fun and I'm glad that you guys felt the same way, because like I was totally prepared to be like, oh, okay, well, I didn't pick up on it, but
no.
But that was I loved that reveal here at the beginning of Ursula.
It's so good. And it's told so casually, too. Yeah. It's so good.
What I'm saying is I kind of did pick up on it. As I was reading it, like, he always felt weird, and I felt like there was something. Okay. So it was like the light switch just turned on. Like, I'd always seen the silhouette, and I feel the same way about Randy, and I don't know what's going to happen there, but I got like, I don't know. I feel like Randy's the bad guy, but that's just... I don't know. I'm just having fun with it.
Hot take.
I'm having a lot of hot takes. This is a very exciting book and story. I love that there's 3 more. I don't want to ask you how much longer to wait, but then I do want to ask you that too. But then we can just move on.
He just said he might be starting over writing.
Honestly,
so probably,
probably. And you know how it's going to end, so it's very exciting. It's very good. Such a delight to read. The Retreat is the most like fucked up thing ever. Where Gudu just like murders a guy because he's like, that's what we do when you're having a hunt.
The game ends.
Yeah, this isn't how your games end here.
Ugh.
The Retreat is kind of just like a summer camp I went to, and I thought it'd be pretty funny if your employer made you do something like that.
It is very funny.
Man, it's
hilarious.
I was horrified reading it, just being like furious that this was actually just happening.
You're in a managerial position, so like, yeah, can you imagine
like making my staff do this? It's just like, oh my gosh.
Because also horrible.
It's one thing if like the camp is nice, but the camp sounded awful. It sounded so bad. And like those camps can still be fun, but it was like they just sounded dirty and nasty, and the river was awful, and it was oh man, it was great. It was such a wonderful time, but I was just like, oh my gosh, this is the worst.
And like them announcing the harebrained scheme of like building like little like circular staircases in the middle of
the
every,
tower. The
the
announcement of
tower.
the tower at the library was hilarious too.
Yeah.
Okay, that actually happened.
Oh my god.
A former employer of mine, who shall remain unnamed, was struggling financially, and they came up with the idea of building a we were calling it the book tower. There was in the library there was this hole in the ground, and you could look over the edge, and you could see the floor below, and then they could look up and see 2 or 3 floors. Well, they wanted to build a tower of books in it, in the circular bookcases. And so we were all like, raising our hands like, well, what about, can you get a cart of books up there? All these obvious questions that everyone would have immediately. How many pounds per square foot would that weigh? We're scribbling, doing math on napkins. And
this is going to change my job drastically.
There was a time that the book tower was going to be a reality, and we were resigned to climbing this ladder and I don't know, having books in like a bag slung over your shoulder. I don't know how. That's where that idea came from.
It never came to fruition, though.
It did. Well, it sort of did, but not as dramatically as it sounds.
Sure. That's awesome. Oh my gosh. So, while we're talking through, I mean, because we're not going chronologically right now too much, because I want to go back to the tour a little bit too, but
yeah,
I do want to talk about.
Around's okay.
Yeah, no, it's great. I want to talk about the disco scene, because I always remember your dad talking about discos and how much he hated discos.
Yeah, vehemently.
And I will say that scene is so slimy and nasty and awful. And I just wanted to know, like, because I know sometimes authors, you put ideas into a book where they're not your own, but I was like, do you hate discos or did you?
Well, one thing I can guarantee about these books is you can't read them and know who I am.
No, of course not.
My personal opinions is I never went out a lot when I was young, and I was not a partier. I didn't care about alcohol too much. I was often in a band, and we would play at these clubs, and I just wanted to get paid and go home because I had to work the next day or had class or whatever.
Sure.
Also, I didn't like places like that because you can't talk to people. It's too loud. You can't hear what people are saying. So I tried to capture, some of my own feelings.
For sure.
In Stephen, but I also was exploring the idea of what kind of lasting effects the rise of disco culture had on society. Mm-hmm. I wanted to demonstrate how people had strong opinions about disco music and that kind of lifestyle. But it had to be expressed through the eye. Everything has to be expressed through the eyes of Stephen.
Sure. Well, his opinion on it and his feeling on it are both natural and well done. And I've been to some modern clubs that are, I guess, the modern iteration of discos, and they really are just terrible places. Obviously, I know a lot of people get some level of enjoyment out of them, which is fine, but
I very purposefully this Stephen has very purposefully avoided them.
Sure.
Well,
for all those same reasons.
When I went out and tried to go out with people and do that lifestyle, I didn't feel like I was being myself. I was another person. And so I just took that to the next step for Stephen and had him do some things that he may not have done otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was
out of character. What happened? What went on between him and Jenny's friend.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I did think it was apt that it's in the setting of the disco that his use of magic allows for his first for him to no longer be a virgin.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting because he does that and he's with them and he's trying to, you know, suss out who's desiring him. But it's and this may or may not have been intentional, but it was I really liked the way magic is almost a stand-in there for the literal psychological affecting the way a club or a disco can play on your emotions to make you and your perception to make you do things you wouldn't normally do.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you're being sweaty and all up on people, and then obviously there's alcohol and there's drugs involved, and it's like that is almost its own form of magic and social contagion. But to use actual magic, it just put those thoughts in my head as those things are all the same. I don't know. I thought that was
also the music's telling you what to do. It's telling you
Yes.
how to behave. I came across a Teddy Pendergrast album the other day. His first album. He's kind of like a Barry White figure, deep voice.
Yeah.
One of I think it's the first song on the album is literally a seduction piece. It's 6 minutes long, and it's a guy talking to a chick at a club. He's trying to get into her pants and trying to convince her. Mm-hmm. He's working on her, and the song's dragging on, and you're just like, I imagine this would be a great song to play in a disco if you wanted to get laid, because it's like telling you literally how to
giving
do
you
that.
A script. Yeah.
You just have to put the song, convince the DJ to put that song on, pick a girl.
It's doing the work for you.
Yeah. It's such a great night.
What were there any scenes in particular that were kind of your, I don't want to say favorites, but that were especially fun for you to write in Ursula?
A lot of it was fun and funny, and I laugh when I reread it. But the stuff that stands out, I guess, maybe like the retreat.
Yeah.
I giggle a lot when I think about that. Other than that, I just gotta say, writing this stuff is really fun for me.
That's so awesome. I love
really,
because like fun. my own experiences sometimes writing has in the past been a chore at times when thinking about, like, you know, trying to write scripts for independent movies that were trying to get made that had all these restrictions put on them as far as budgets and things that, you know, impossible restrictions that made it not as fun. So I love hearing stories about writers and hearing directly from writers. They're like, no, this shit's great. I'm having a great time.
Hey, there's a couple of things I wanted to bring up while we're on the subject of that.
Yes.
Or maybe I'm changing the subject. I wrote this down.
Did you make a voice memo first?
Yeah, I should have. So there was this there's an observation that was particularly gratifying to me. There's a guy on Twitter called Night Danger.
Nice.
He bills himself as the undisputed most intelligent Canadian alive.
Wow.
Excellent.
So he was talking about
high bar.
Yeah. He was talking about a novel called Hex Rated and calling it out for its heavy-handed moralizing. I guess it takes place in the past. And he said that the moralizing broke the spell that the book was, that the book puts you in. Mm-hmm. And he called out Shagduk and Ursula of Ulm as examples of period pieces that don't hold its time period in total contempt.
I agree with that.
I was very gratifying that someone noticed that, because I loved growing up in the 70s. And I don't hold any time period in contempt, because it is what it is. Right. We were not there then. other people were, and society was different then. It doesn't make sense to hold it under contempt. There were bad things that happened. There were good things, just as there are now.
Yeah.
That being said, I wanted to ask you guys if you noticed any anachronisms so far.
I was not specifically looking, but I can't think of anything that like jumped out at me.
Wait, what is
So
an anachronism?
so like a phrase someone would say now that they wouldn't have said back in the day.
Oh,
I can't
Well, you
think
see
of
it in
one
movies
either.
a lot. You see a period piece where it's set in
Yeah.
1983, and you're like,
yes,
they
yes,
didn't
yeah, I
have
know
that
what
in
you mean now.
1983, or no one would say that.
Yeah.
Well, and the big one is you go back and look at like golden age of Hollywood films, like period pieces, but everybody's hair looks like it's 1950s and 60s.
Or how everyone just has a British accent.
Well, kind of
Random things. I mean, that's not.
or like
we're
bell
talking about
bottoms
exactly.
on pants that were the time period that would have been unheard of.
Well, that sort of thing drives me nuts. I watched a TV series recently. What was it called? Can't remember the title, but it took place in the 80s or the 70s in Florida, and it was just filled with attitudes that people didn't have at that time, and turns of phrase, and the way people talked was all today.
Right.
And it clashed, and it made it impossible for me to enjoy, at least on that level. And that's how it always is for me when I watch period pieces. It's just sometimes you can tell they're trying their best to make it feel realistic, but they don't do enough research, and things get by them, and it just bugs me. So I worked really hard not to do that in these books.
Yeah,
Well,
I think you succeeded. I didn't catch anything.
No, I feel like now that I'm thinking about it, there was one time where I wondered if something felt newer than something else, but I can't remember what it was. But also because we talked about how thorough you are with these books, I trusted that it probably was older than I realized.
Well, and we were, 89.
Yes,
so
and it was before my time, so it's hard for me to comment
but it
on.
feels very authentic to that time period.
I appreciate you asking us for notes, though.
Yeah,
That's really nice.
Have you watched The Northman by Robert Eggers?
No.
We adore Eggers, and it's it's a Viking movie, which is rife for fantasy in most cases. But that, I think, as far as movies that I've seen recently, is the least anachronistic film I think I've ever seen.
Yeah.
There is zero modern sensibilities in that at all.
Yeah.
I'd like to see it.
It's very good.
Yeah, the only one is Alexander Skarsgård is a beautiful man, and
hey, there were some beautiful.
That's a
men
thing.
back then.
Yeah.
There
Well,
had
no one. I don't think anyone
look at
is.
Scandinavians now.
Yeah, fair enough.
So, but yeah, that's, again, obviously was not around during the Viking era, so I can't definitively say.
But no,
they nailed it.
Yeah,
but it felt very authentic, and for me, wasn't alive in the 70s. These books feel very authentic to that time period to me.
As long as it feels authentic, that's the author's done his job.
Yeah. I will say that the limitations of that time period is what really puts you in there. Like talking about like the band and all the like little things about like PA systems and stuff that would totally not be an issue at all anymore, or just having like the vinyls melting in the car.
Yeah.
Like things like that.
Well, that Steven doesn't have a phone in his home, let alone a cell phone.
Like a line,
no AC. Yeah. And the fact that just getting around AC is a bit like all those things.
Washing clothes, you have to go upstairs. Like all those limitations, I think,
all
kind of
to everything.
Would make up for any sort of actual like dialogue. But also, it's not that long ago, too. Like, sure, they wouldn't say like what Gen Z people say nowadays, or millennials, I suppose. But
that's how I lived in college in the late 80s. I didn't have a phone. I didn't have AC. So it was easy for me to identify with that stuff.
Yeah.
But
those things really put you in it.
Somebody pointed out an anachronism to me the other day.
Okay.
How dare they?
And I was like, damn it. No one else is going to find it.
Oh, you're not going to tell us what it is?
I'll give you $1 million if you can.
It's gonna
You're
be
you're not
in either
gonna find it.
Shagduk.
But it really bugs me that it's there, and I did my homework, but I didn't do it right.
Ah,
And it's
I
like, oh,
understand
why
that.
didn't I do that? I would have caught it.
yeah.
Mhm.
Well, here's the thing. That's pretty awesome that it required that level of looking to catch
Yeah.
an anachronism, because usually they're pretty bald faced. You know, they're just kind of there. To have to dig that deep for one, that's pretty sick.
Well, there was a thing, and I guess it was Ursula. This was late in the game, right before we were going to publish, and I had moved a scene from one part of the book to another, but then I had to go through the whole book and like, okay, for continuity's sake, like let's say
Yeah.
somebody buys a green jacket, you can't mention the green jacket before they buy it.
Right.
Well, I missed one of those, and very, very late I caught it, and my editor was very nice about fixing it for me. It cost them a little bit of money and effort at that point because it was late.
That's great though. That speaks to Pilem.
Yeah,
And
but
his
there's
dedication.
a couple of little things in Shagduk I've got on a spreadsheet that if they ever reprint or resubmit it to the printer,
Make some minor changes. Yeah.
things I'd like to fix. There's one page in Shagduk where I use a cliche. It's something I say all the time. I think one of you guys said it earlier. A light bulb went off in my head.
Yeah.
It's a phrase that everybody uses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not that Stephen uttered it that's a problem, but he utters it twice on the same page.
Yeah.
And when I saw that, it bugs me, and I want to go fix that.
Yeah.
But I mean, there are writers that people love who don't give a shit about that sort of thing, and they use the same word 82 times on one page, and they don't give a fuck.
That bugs me. I have authors that I love very much that I'll catch them doing that. Not all the time, but occasionally, like the same word in a sentence, or like two sentences back to back, or maybe with one sentence in between, and that is a pet peeve of mine. So,
and there are times you can do it to hammer something home, but a lot of times it just doesn't.
It just gets repetitive.
It just doesn't sound right. Yeah.
Well, I see it as an opportunity. When I do it, one thing I do, I want to say I have a routine by now, but I've only done 2 books. But one thing I do is I run my book through a word counter, and it gives me a list of every single word I used, and it ranks it by frequency. So immediately I can see, oh, these are the words I used the most, the, very common words. But as you get farther down, you see a word that leaps out on you, and I was like, why did I use that word 47 times? And so I search for it. I look at all 47 instances, and immediately I start thinking of, I could use this other better word. Change it. But it gives you an opportunity to think about the poetics of a sentence, harmony and alliteration.
Damn.
That's awesome. That's a great tool to use.
That's truly awesome. I mean, the stuff you're writing is so compelling. Like it's probably my favorite thing I've read. It feels like I'm reading something that is. It feels like I'm reading something that feels the caliber of like legendary writing. I'm not trying to like flatter you or anything, but I really love these. And it's like hearing about all your effort and your process. It's like that might be why it's so compelling and so interesting. Like it just leaps off the page. I want to turn the page. It's a real page turner, like, and I actually mean that.
Well, there's a lot of care went into it. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's any good. I mean, I won't tell you how many hours I spent on my first attempt at a painting. It was awful, and I just,
I could say the same.
A lot of care went into that.
One of the things I think that does that, because we're all really big Gene Wolfe fans, who's known to be a writer who does some puzzle box stuff, but will also write an interesting story, but then also have hidden layers of meaning in his stories where there's other things happening underneath the surface that usually are only developed on rereads. And I've found one of the things that I am drawn to with these is there's some similar aspects to this story, because there's a whole plot line with Ursula Diane, but you really have to piece together kind of to try to know like what's actually happening here, because you're getting it just from Stephen's perspective. His viewpoint is very limited on what's like actually going on, even though she's got a spleen in her freezer.
It's not just his perspective, but it's what of his perspective he's writing down.
Well, yes, there's two filters.
Yeah,
absolutely. So that I find that really enjoyable. There's just the very surface level. There's Stephen's story and the world he's displaying in this book, and then below that, there's obviously the way he's developing magic. There's also like he's being ensorcelled by a demon who isn't named. He's being coached by some guy named Krolok. He's also being, he's now captured Shagduk, Gudu. And it's like that. And then there's Ursula, who we really don't know what she's up to, but you can see pieces of it. Obviously, we'll know more as the story goes on, but I really enjoy that depth of storytelling where there's just little bits and fragments and pieces, but it adds a richness to it that it also allows for your imagination to just like go off the rails, because you're just like, what's actually happening here?
Because there are loose ends that may never be tied.
Sure.
And that's how life is.
Yeah.
You encounter this mysterious person, they go off, and you don't see them again. Or at least Stephen doesn't on the pages of the diary, or that you know of. And maybe he was important, maybe he wasn't. But when your imagination takes over, you're right. You kind of you consider who that person might have been or what it might have meant, and you do the work for me, so I don't have to go in there and make it explicit.
Absolutely. Well, and one thing I've been thinking about a lot as we got ready for this conversation is that I think, even though this is a book full of demons, the most diabolical thing that happens in this book is when he goes to Diane's house and he sees the picture that reveals that Dawn, was dating his uncle.
And that's the moment that we get to see into Stephen's family life.
Yes,
that's the moment.
We get a little.
You mentioned that last, because we're like, are we going to see? And you're like,
well, and there's a mention of a mom too.
This book, there's more like,
there's a little bit there,
some connection.
But I was just like, when I read that, I just was like, JB, you bastard.
That a lot of the stuff that's in the book has a seed of reality to it. That actually happened to me. I went out with a girl. I went to her house. She invited me in. We're hanging out in her room, like laying on her bed, and we're talking, listening to music. And
this is right after the disco, right?
We're trying to get to know each other. And when you're trying to get to know someone, you figure out, oh yeah, I know that person. I somehow she said she went out with my uncle. And I was just like, what? He's 7 years older than I am, so it wasn't like
a huge gap. I wondered reading that. I was like, that's so good. Oh my gosh,
that's pretty damn good.
That's amazing.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Say no more.
So funny. Yeah. Tragic.
Yeah.
So similar to my question a few minutes ago of were there any scenes that were the most fun for you to write? Like we were talking about with the magic getting a lot more fleshed out and deeper in this book. The same you could say with all the characters. Were there any of the side characters and friends and coworkers and things. Who did you have the most fun fleshing out in this book and having Stephen interact with more? Was there anybody that was, there was sparks flying between the characters for good or ill that was especially fun for you to write in Ursula?
I had a good time writing about Dixie, Stephen's boss. She's a composite of several different people. I knew like a chemistry teacher, another boss that I had. So whenever these characters reappear, I'm like, oh boy, I get to.
Yeah,
Spont was kind of that way.
I
had a coworker / roommate that I drew heavily from that person to inform the Spont character. So while those may be the only two that leap out at me at first, but every character is that way for me. It's really fun to do that, because I myself don't know who these people are, and I discover who they are as I write them. My editor told me, and sometimes you can tell that I don't know who these people are, and so my editor would be like, know who Dawn is and know what she wants. And I'm like, well, I don't fully know who she is yet. I'm not sure who she wants. And that helped me to stop and say, okay, who are these people? What do they want? What's their game? Stephen says that a number of times. What's her game? When Stephen asks that, it forces me to consider it. What's the answer here? So I struggled a lot with Diane, and I know who she is now, and that's one reason I have to kind of do some rewriting in book 3, is because the Diane I wrote about way back when I first submitted the manuscript, she's evolved and developed in ways that are not reflected in those 70K words. So it's easier just to start over than to go through the whole thing painstakingly.
Sure. Yeah, of course. Yeah,
that makes sense.
What about you guys had some things you wanted to ask about or talk about the tour? Were any of the episodes that take place on their tour, was that drawn from your own band experience explicitly, or
there's stories I wanted to tell, and there's stories that I do tell, like when you go over to your friends for a drink and you're like shooting the shit and you're telling your stories, and we all have these 32 stories that we tell over and over and over. Some of these were those stories, but some of them aren't really stories. They're just minor details and episodes that I just plug them straight into the book. I'll change them around, of course, to fit to fit.
Right. But it's the same. They're the same beats.
Like when you get pulled over and your friend has a giant bag of weed and doesn't throw it out the window. And
yeah, that happened in Virginia, actually.
That feels like a story you would tell at a party for sure.
Yeah.
You dodged the popo.
Amazing.
I mean, what about having to fight a dwarf? Because that has happened twice now. I noticed in this book there wasn't like a giant action sort of climax like the other, like a Shagduk, where they're like kind of fighting in the sewers almost, or in the drains, right? And this one, like kind of the most
kind of thing.
Yeah. This one, it feels like the same sort of characters appear, like the dwarf with the tiger, right? And he has to fight him.
Panther thing.
Yeah. But in the little hobbit hole room, that felt like the most action in this story.
I know who these people are. I know who the tiger is, and I know who the dwarf is.
Yeah,
Excellent.
I mean, they feel they're back again, and he ends up in the hospital, right? It's so like kind of fuzzy what happens.
Yeah. Well, because that's relatively early in the book, and that's around when we miss a day.
I feel
Isn't
like
that
it's
too?
it's midway.
Maybe about mid.
Is it not?
That's phenomenal. No, just that's enough that we just know that
tiger is
there's more here, and there we will see. I'm excited to learn more about that.
I was curious about the missing a day too. He just notes, oh, I didn't write anything. But it felt more important than that. And I don't know what else to say other than that, but okay, you're nodding. So
yeah. We're just thinking out loud at the
I know I don't really know, but it was like I didn't have anything to latch onto without, and I'll reread it and try to see if I can parse anything, but it felt like there was something being hidden or something.
Is that right before he gets to like, this is the worst day of my life, pretty much entry? The last entry in the book? Is that the day?
No, it's early. It's relatively early on, I want to say. I think it's in the second week or so.
Well, there's a mundane explanation for that. One of the first things I did when I began the manuscript was I wrote out the days and dates. So I'm like, Monday, July 27th, Tuesday, July 28th. I had to write all that. Took like hours.
Yeah.
And I messed one of them up.
Nice.
And later on, it messed me up. It's like, oh no, this I got to fix this somehow, because by that time I was like writing, he was referring to other dates, and I somehow eliminated a day, and I noticed it and figured, well, that happens. If you keep a diary, you don't have to write on it every day.
Sure.
There's the meaning.
There it is.
Yeah, that's
there
great.
I love it. That's hilarious.
I'm looking forward to. I want to do a reread at some point. I may be starting here shortly.
Yeah.
Starting with Shagduk and just reading an entry a day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Until it's done. I'm not going to claim the idea for that. I saw a book in Barnes and Noble actually, and I wish I had gotten in on this and seen about it sooner, because I'm a huge fan of the book Dracula, and I guess somebody during the lockdowns kind of realized that the dates of the letters was coming up.
Wow.
And so he
That's
started
cool.
this online newsletter and was sending that chapter every day with the date that it corresponded.
That's cool.
And they released a hardback of it with some tweets and things that as it grew in popularity and people were starting to interact with it, they included some of that stuff in it. But I'm probably going to do that here with both Shagduk and Ursula for a reread of reading Stephen's entry on the corresponding date through the whole.
That'd be a cool thing to do.
That'd be fun.
I'd like to do that too, but I mean, I was thinking about like one of my favorite bands is Rush, and listening to like Geddy Lee interviews and stuff. They're like, yeah, do you ever listen to Moving Pictures? And he's like, no, we don't listen to that stuff. And it's like, when you're too close to it, you don't want to hear that again. I don't like, let's see. Let me find it. I was in a band in Austin in the 90s, and we put out this CD, the Marble Index. I never listened to this. I don't want to hear this again. I recorded it. We played it 1 million times. I never want to hear this again, probably.
Yeah.
But
that's a hard thing, being able to separate yourself and enjoy your art again.
Yeah, I can't imagine reading Shagduk the way I would read any other book. But yeah, I probably will someday. But I'm scared that I'll find a bunch of stuff that is not up to snuff anymore. It's like, oh, I can't believe I wrote that.
I was able to. The closest I've come to that, I went to film school, and for my senior thesis project, I made a feature film, and we ended up getting it sold in a bunch of territories, including the U.S. And I got a text a couple 18 months, 2 years ago or something, from a friend that had just found it on the Roku channel. And I had no idea that it was there. And so my wife and I ended up staying up until like midnight, 1 a.m, which is like not a late time, except that, we have kids. And I hadn't even looked at it in years. I genuinely don't know when the last time I watched any of it. and I there was enough distance to be able to look, just kind of separate myself and be like, you know what, I'm remembering the fun things and appreciating the fun things, and not just, oh, Jesus Christ, this is definitely made by a dude in his early 20s with no money and big dreams.
That's funny.
There's a band I was in high school called Killer Squid.
Nice.
And
Excellent name. Excellent name.
The music's pretty embarrassing. But one of my cousins still has the cassette.
Hell yeah.
It's, as far as I know, it's the only copy left in the world.
Oh man.
Wow.
And it's like he could, like, I don't know, bribe me with it or something. I'd like to
you
just
gotta
get it go away.
convert that.
I don't want to hear
come by
anything.
these days.
That's awesome. Felt like there was another music thing that I wanted to bring up. Oh, yes. Oh, one of my favorite characters. I'm blanking on his name.
Turtle.
Oh,
Man?
Dave too?
No. It was he shows up and in fine form towards the end of the book. But he's at one of these parties, and it's acoustic guitar dude who's playing Eagles songs but making them Christian.
Oh,
Yeah.
I lost it.
My brother encountered that guy.
that's awesome.
That's so funny.
And I
forgot about that guy.
He told me about that, and I just wrote it all right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My wife is like, "What are you writing down?" And I'm like, "Nothing."
Nothing. But that was such a beautiful moment, because like I'm not a fan of the Eagles.
That was a thing to do though at that
appreciate
time
it.
period, to make the songs
Well,
Christian.
that was a thing to do in our time period.
Yeah,
in our youth group,
Yeah.
Playing U2 and whatever, and either tweaking enough or just pretending the lyrics are worship songs.
Yeah.
So that I loved that little moment of, he's playing Eagles songs but making it Christian.
Well, the fun part for me was going through the Eagles songs and trying to adapt them, and give them that treatment. Take it easy.
They're a lot about drugs. Most
really
of them.
lent itself the best.
Yes. Well, and there's a whole South Park episode about that. It was one of my favorite episodes, where Cartman is deciding to make boatloads of money by making a Christian band, and he just takes pop songs and replaces Baby with Jesus.
Yeah.
And, so it reminded me of that as well. It tickled me deeply. That little brief moment of this, because there's also the the douchebag at the party with the acoustic guitar trope.
Always.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Is
that the Star Wars party?
No, this was later.
No, this was at the retreat.
Oh yeah, you're right. My bad.
Yeah.
I did love the Star Wars party though.
Star Wars party.
I wondered if Star Wars would come up, because I was like, it's 77. I feel like Star Wars will have to come up.
Just so happened that this book happened when Star Wars came out, and so I had to.
Yeah.
Had to.
Well, I didn't have to, but I wanted to.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And the reader wants me to.
Yeah, and it was a cultural phenomenon to where it makes sense. It feels right, and the way you did it is great.
Totally.
My dad tells the story of his teacher had the foresight of knowing, either teacher, maybe even the principal, had the foresight to be like, hey, this is a cultural moment that will not be matched, and like canceled school essentially and took all the kids, like put them on buses and took them to the movie theaters to see it.
Wow.
When it came out.
I don't know if I mentioned this before, but when I sent the manuscript to Shagduk to my brother, he said Yoda wasn't in the first Star Wars, and I was like, "Oh shit!" I didn't think about that, so I had to go and take that out. That's another thing.
Good
Got it the
That's
last
amazing.
He totally isn't. That's
No,
really
he's
good
not.
catch.
That's funny.
I think now we're going to get into Star Wars nerd territory, but I believe that A New Hope is the only movie that he's not in at least the Lucas films.
Yeah, yes,
I'm correct in that.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going to have like a Yoda guy at the party talking, Yoda speak, and they were going to.
Right.
Because that would be totally funny. That would be
I just wasn't careful. I didn't remember.
Yeah.
That he wasn't in there.
Yeah.
So I'm really grateful to my brother for catching that.
Yeah, because Empire is like 4 years later. Yeah,
That's an
That
80
party
to
scene was a lot of fun to write.
The party scene was
a lot of
great.
fun to read too. Yeah, the interaction and I took it as Steven obviously had not seen the movie, and so him just trying to go with the flow of like, you know.
Yeah, he doesn't even know
playing
what character
along.
he is.
Well, and
It was
that
so
makes
funny.
sense too, because he's too busy farming muskrats and like
Yes.
being at the
Yeah.
library.
Yeah,
Benoit Kenobi.
Yeah, Benoit. Yeah.
I love it.
So not like doesn't even make sense.
No, it doesn't. It's so good.
Yeah, I don't know if you can tell, JB, but we really enjoyed this.
We really
It's a lot
did.
of
We
fun.
really did.
Yeah.
All the chicks were Leia, I guess. And it
Yes.
wasn't one of them like Aunt Maru or whatever her name
I think
is.
one was,
There was
yeah.
one alone.
She didn't have a lot of choice.
No,
No, I mean, who else would you want to be?
no, I know. You just got to do the donuts.
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
So good.
I did enjoy as well this because that parties with Dawn. It's interesting the way I feel like Dawn and Jenny are juxtaposed in the book. I feel like, and it feels sort of like Dawn is the good choice and Jenny's the bad choice if it's a choice. But then I don't know. I'm really interested to see how it'll develop because it's obviously it ends up. I really like how it ends up being more complicated than that, and also that maybe neither of them like Steven also at the same time.
Yeah, he kind of messes up both.
He kind of does.
options,
He
and
kind of
there's
does.
kind of Diane waiting in the wings
Yes.
for ulterior
Which
motives.
is like almost his destiny,
Yeah,
kind of.
it does
Yeah.
kind of start feeling that way.
It kind of
Yeah.
feels like my love life when I was Steven's age.
Yeah.
Right.
I didn't know what I was doing. Maybe the people I was with, they didn't know either. I don't know.
No, I relate to that so much when you're like young and it's like and everything feels like potential and you're trying to figure everything out, but then it's like you don't know what to do. And then there's it's like this combination of missed opportunities and imagined missed opportunities and all these, all those other things. But
Yeah, and the fact that Stephen was in his early 20s and was still a virgin.
yes.
These were simpler, more innocent times.
Yes.
We forget how innocent people were then.
Yeah.
Which
No,
is
you're right.
an odd concept considering how many of them, like Steven and so many of these other characters, did go and face something like Vietnam, and then we're still so innocent in other aspects of life.
I really love that we got to meet Loretta too. That scene was also great. And it does like you said, with him being a virgin into his 20s, it's also like he was a virgin with a long-term girlfriend, but then who is a lesbian and she made him make out with chicks or something. It's like
Yeah. Oh, I love that line where it's like it's not as fun as you think it would be.
Yeah,
kind of
the scenes were oddly specific.
Yes, they were. Yeah. I wondered about that too.
Yeah.
I wondered about that one too.
Yeah, it makes sense why he was a virgin.
Yes.
Out.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, Loretta was a mix of people.
Sure.
Who was the one lady at the retreat that like interacted with Gudu? Wasn't she some like
Oh, the Russian lady?
what was her name? She was like
Doris, the old librarian.
Doris. Yes, Doris. Yes.
like she was the one that just started talking to him. I thought that was crazy.
I did really enjoy that about Gudu, is where you're in a scene and he would interact with people, but you never knew when he was being witnessed and when he wasn't, and what he was doing was real or
Like
not.
he could flip on a switch kind of thing Steven mentioned.
I was almost wondering about a Tyler Durden situation for a moment where there's like Steven projecting himself in some, but I don't think that was happening. But
I did notice something fascinating about Steven's. He often talked about Shagduk and like what Shagduk's like nature was, I guess. But there was one thing that happened on the same page where he said that Shagduk looked sad or something, or he thought he might be sad. But then like a couple paragraphs down, he's like, but Shagduk is incapable of feelings. And then it just made me feel like Steven really just does not know what the fuck is going on with this demon at all. And he's like trying to sort it out like in a confident, insecure sort of way. And that was kind of my take on it. And maybe that, I don't know if that's the way I'm meant to feel, but
this is one I'd love to pitch to you guys too, because like I started to like feel for Gudu.
Yeah.
Because he seems pretty good natured. And then he kills a guy for no reason.
But
and then
how they do
assaults
it where he
Dawn
comes
in some capacity. Yeah.
Seemingly rapes Dawn and yeah, just murders a dude. And the murder, like, oh, okay.
Yeah, but the Dawn situation, you're like, wait a minute, like, is he just cold and unfeeling and doesn't understand? It's like you don't know at what level.
But then Steven thinks it's his fault.
He does
because he's like, oh, my magic ricocheted on.
So I don't.
Kind of thing.
It was just very weird where you are like, this is not a person. This is not a human. This is something
that's kind of
else.
what I took it was like, you get these really fun moments with Gudu where he's almost kind of getting a little cute.
Yeah.
Like little buddy.
Like Lilo and Stitch
His
kind of thing.
shenanigans are impish.
Stitch.
Yes.
But it's like, he's
he
not
doesn't
Stitch.
know.
He is still a demon.
Yes.
And so there maybe is some like not necessarily directly approaching this from like a Christian perspective of demon, but just like that's going to imply a certain amount of evil is putting like a human emotions and motivations behind something, but an inhuman feeling towards things and people's and situations, as opposed to what we would expect from people.
Well, your Christian remark is key because I've always been kind of bored by movies where there's satanic stuff going on, or there's the devil or a demon that's Christian. Because I'm not really religious myself.
Sure.
I was raised in a Christian household, but I don't believe in a lot of things. So when I researched demons to try and figure out how I was going to approach Gudu, I realized that demons weren't a Christian invention, that they exist in other cultures. They predate Christianity. And I really like the idea that demons predate the human race and we don't know what their nature is.
Yeah.
And so that's
inhuman it's
Gudu's one of those demons.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know. It was a lot of fun for me to find out who Gudu was on the page. And so I'm kind of proud of that creation because it's one definitely original idea of mine was, what's a demon like if you spend time with them? I did not read some other book that I just, I just kind of made that up on my own. There's some other ideas that haven't come into play yet, or haven't been revealed to the reader yet that I think are pretty original, and I'm excited to realize them on the page. But the idea of like librarian finds a spell book in a library, and I'm starting to see other books out there that are similar, librarians, demons, 70s. There was one book that had like three of those things together. And I'm like, whoa.
That's fascinating. It's weird how
so it's not like
that.
The idea, so that aspect of my books is not wholly original. There's other books that deal with these. Lovecraft has already been here, and M.R. James has been and has trod this territory already. But there are some original ideas in there that I'm proud of, that differentiate what I'm doing from what others have done. In particular, Robert Irwin's book, Satan Wants Me, which is presented as a diary, takes place in the 60s. Guy dabbles in the occult. So there's certain superficial resemblances between my book and his.
Yeah. That's I think you should be proud. You know, we have so many more books to read, but we've been reading a lot of stuff. And these are certainly unique to anything else that we've been reading as a group or separately. And yeah, like we've said over and over again, we're huge fans, and we're super happy to have you back on here talking about them. As we're kind of approaching the time to be wrapping this up, I don't personally, we don't want any spoilers, but is there anything that you would like to put out as a tease for book 3? And that's totally cool if there's not anything that you want to talk about.
Book 3 is going to give you what you want.
Hell yeah.
And then book 4 is going to blow your mind. And book 5 is just going to be icing on the cake.
Okay. All right.
I cannot wait.
Those are the official titles.
I love it.
What happens in book 4 is based on a wholly original idea, or at least I think it's original, that I'm really excited about. I just can't wait to write. Book 4 has not been written yet at all.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But I have extensive notes on it.
Man,
awesome.
I'm
pumped.
Well, we're huge fans, JB. We can't wait to keep reading and keep exploring this series. In closing, is there anything else that you would like to discuss or put out there for people that are looking to start reading your books?
I don't think so, but I want to express my gratitude for having me on your podcast and for being so interested in my books. It's really a lot of fun to be on your show and talk about this stuff. Shagduk has become kind of a miniature cult classic.
Yeah.
But it concerns me that there are people out there like you who get it and they really enjoy it, but they don't have any way of discovering it.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that you're helping put it in front of people so they can see it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we so appreciate you coming back on. It's we love you and we love your books, and we're so grateful for your time, and can't wait to talk to you about the next one. And any other time you want to come on and talk about anything, you're always welcome on the show.
Absolutely.
So yes, we have been speaking with JB Jackson about Ursula of Ulm.
This is an excellent cover, by the way.
It is a phenomenal cover. I think
in a sea of terrible covers, it's like an actually awesome.
We're very serious about our book covers and very judgy about book covers, and this is a great
I'm pretty
cover.
pleased how it turned out.
Yeah,
it's good.
So everybody, check out Ursula of Ulm. You can get it directly from Pilum. You can get it on Amazon.
You can get it at Barnes and Noble.
Get it at Barnes
Wherever
and Noble.
fine books are sold.
Oh yeah,
fantastic. So yeah, everybody check this out. You're gonna love this series. Get Shagduk, get Ursula of Ulm. Yeah, this has been another episode of the Under Towers podcast. I'm Steven.
I'm Daniel.
I'm Sam.
And yeah, check JB's books out. Check out Horsebred. Check out Hole Dweller. Flies the Coop 3 was just released. It's an excellent album to listen to while you're reading Ursula of Ulm.
Yes, it is.
And yeah, we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks again, JB. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Namari, everybody.